In this paper, I'm going to be looking at indirect cost of conflicts in the sense that in the context of Mali and the Sahel, I'm going to be focusing on households that are not necessarily directly affected by violence, directly in the sense of locally geographical proximity. So it could be households that are remote from conflict, but would still be indirectly affected by conflict because conflict events and violent events occur on the way to their traditional migration destinations. Conflict in the world is a first-order development issues because it affects a large share of the world population, and especially of the population living in extreme poverty. And so it's important to think how it can affect pathways out of poverty, or conflict can affect these pathways out of poverty. Most conflicts that occurred since the end of the Second World War were civil conflicts. And the conflict in Mali and the Sahel is a very important example of a prolonged for a very long time civil conflicts. So a brief timeline of the conflict. So this conflict started in around early 2012, late 2011, with a Tuareg-led rebellion in the north of Mali, but has then spread to the center of the country and also to neighboring countries, Burkina Faso and Niger, as some jihadist group piggybacked the initial Tuareg-led rebellion. And so this created like a general state of insecurity, instability in these areas, and a relative absence of the states. And so most of conflict events actually target civilians. And so I'm going to try to understand how civilians, how households, also economic opportunities are affected by this conflict. And so this happens also in the context of Mali, where migration is very important for the Malian economy. So here on the map, I've been plotting the internal migration flows. So that's like the average number of migrants between like each region and a set of localities that have been surveyed by the National Statistic Institute of Mali. So you can see that all these regions the regions of Mali are interconnected. So it's about 26% of rural households that report at least one migrant, would it be in Mali and abroad, 18% in Mali and 9% in Africa. And 19% of rural households also report receiving remittances from migrants. And when households receive remittances, remittances represent a large share of consumption. And so migration in the context of Mali has been shown to be an important source of insurance for households, so that transfers increase when households are faced with a shock. But also in the absence of shocks, migration is an important income smoothing strategy because most of rural households are engaged in agricultural activities, and most agricultural activities are highly seasonal because they're rain-fed and there's just one rainy season. So there is one season, the lean season, before the harvest, when economic activities are very low and income sources are very low. And so many households send one member at least in migration in the post-harvest season. And so this economic mobility can be deterred by conflict. So that's just like one example of an attack that occurred in September of a boat that was sailing on the Niger, that is connecting from Koulikoro, close to the capital Bamako, up to the north in Timbuktu. And So the comments on this attack, so it was a boat with passengers, commented that this makes clear that even traveling by boat is not even considered as safe now, when boat was already used as an alternative to avoid the roads that have been considered as unsafe. And so I collected a bit more qualitative evidence on how insecurity could affect mobility. So in a phone survey conducted in 2021, still with the National Statistic Institute, from the residents of the center and north of the country, it's less than 30% that declare that they consider it as rather safe, the road between their locality and the capital, Bamako. And then conducted qualitative interviews with bus companies. The way they take into account this insecurity is they would stop some lines altogether, so stop serving in some specific years the center and northern region, or they would maintain their lines, but they would reduce the number of stops that they do on the way. So in this sense, insecurity could increase the risk associated with mobility, or also the monetary cost of migration. So maybe you need to go further to be able to take a bus to travel. And so in this study, I provide evidence on the disruptive effect of conflict on migration. So there is two steps in the way I study this. So first of all, I estimate a gravity model with dyadic data, so pairs of the rural localities of Mali and a set of destination. So I will mostly focus on internal migration. So it's like the 9 regions of Mali as potential destination, and then extend also to some neighboring countries. And so using this dyadic data, I estimate a gravity model, and I find like an elasticity of internal migration to conflict fatalities on the road between each locality and destination of 0.20 to 0.29. That we can compare to the elasticities that are generally estimated in gravity model. It's about half of the elasticity to distance, for example. And so this, like the dyadic data, allows to have origin by year and destination by year fixed effects. So these effects can be estimated while controlling for all time varying factors that will affect villages in Mali. And then I finish on this second point, and then maybe we can take the question. Once I have estimated this destination-specific effects, I estimate an aggregate effect of road insecurity. So it's like the weighted, the average road insecurity faced by each rural locality of Mali, to see what's the aggregate effects on the stock of migrants and on departures in seasonal migration. And so we also see like a negative elasticity of both the stock of migrants and new departures in migration. And then I look at this the welfare implication of this average road insecurity to look at the effect on consumption expenditures during the lean season. And this is estimated only with like a two-way fixed effect strategy, so it's less estimated than the gravity model. But I still claim that we can have some causal estimates, because we're not looking only at conflicts directly surrounding the locality, but it can be conflicts that are very far away from a given locality, but still affect the locality because it's on its way to migration destination. There was a question, someone raised the hand before, but...
Yes, thank you. Just a clarifying question. So you're focusing on conflicts basically along the edges in this network, not in the nodes, in a sense, right? So it's not a conflict or fatality surrounding origin or destination, potential destination, right? It's a conflict along the road. I'm asking because in principle, there is literature showing that, shocks to both origin and destination can affect migration patterns. So maybe you can do both. I don't know. Maybe you can do both.
So I'm also controlling for conflict at origin and destination. It's just I have less confidence in the causal interpretation of these estimates. So I will focus less on this part. I'm more confident on what is like bilateral cost, because you can still estimate this while controlling for origin by year and destination by year fixed effects, but that will be included also. And so yeah, it's the edge, as you said, not the node, but the edge being like the road between each locality that is like I compute on OpenStreetMap. I will show this in a bit. This study contributes to the literature on conflict and mobility. That is actually not a very dense literature. I'm also hoping to contribute to the literature on barriers and determinants of migration. So the literature has shown that there could be many barriers to migration, liquidity constraints, weak property rights, informational constraints, and so insecurity could be an additional constraint in this framework. Also to the literature on gravity models of migration, adding like modeling this insecurity as a bilateral migration cost. But then also I'm hoping to add to the literature on the cost of conflict, which has like increasingly look at the micro cost of conflict, but also on the indirect cost of conflict and how conflict can diffuse through network effects. So for example, through firms network. And then I'm maybe not contributing, but mostly like using also the methods of the effect of transportation infrastructures on economic development, that has looked at the effect of railroad construction, road construction on economic development through trade and migration. And here it would be a bit the opposite effect, that insecurity reduce connectivity of localities and hence push them towards autarcy, and it's detrimental to development in this sense. So in this study, I'm going to be using two main sources of migration data. So it's a panel of localities. So in this sense, it's repeated cross-section. So it's data that has been collected by the National Statistic Institute of Mali during the full period in spite of conflict, with the exception of the year 2013, where no data was collected. And the same households are surveyed 4 times during a year, and this allows to measure the seasonality in consumption, seasonality in employment, and also seasonality then in presence of household member. So I can measure the flow of migration by the presence or absence of members in the different quarters. Then if a household member is missing, they will ask, where is he? And he will be reported as having left the household either temporarily or permanently. So that's very interesting migration data, because you can date precisely the departure of the household member, but the caveat is that you don't know where these people have migrated. And so to estimate the gravity model and to build this dyadic data, I'm going to be relying on a migration module where the household head reports the stock of migrants that have left the household, and for different destinations. So here we know precisely in which region of Mali these people have migrated. For international migration, it's less precise. And if I want to be able to capture international migration, I'm going to be looking at remittances for which there is detailed origin. So this is the temporality of the data collection, and it's like I have about 900 villages for which there is at least 2 years of data collection to construct the panel. Then the way I will define a road conflict. So for each locality, for example, this is a locality in the region of Gao. Using simply OpenStreetMap, I compute the shortest route to each of potential destinations. So that's the shortest route to Niger, that's the shortest route to Gao, and that's the shortest route in orange to the city of Bamako. When I will take the bigger as destination, I just know the region, I take the main city in each region as a proxy. For neighboring countries, I take the closest city of at least 50,000 inhabitants in this neighboring country. So the one that is closest to the considered locality. And so along each of these routes that are shortest routes on OpenStreetMap, I keep a buffer of 2 kilometers. I also do robustness check with 5 kilometers and consider all the conflicts that occur within this buffer. In terms of the timing of this conflict, so since most departure occur in the post-harvest period, I will consider conflict that occur in the pre-harvest period. So the hypothesis is that people observe conflict events in the pre-harvest period and shape expectation on what would be the conflict level in the post-harvest period based on what they have observed. And so when I look at migration as measured like in the stock, I will be looking at this pre-harvest migration flows, but pre-harvest conflicts, road conflicts, but in the T-1 period.
Sorry, Marion.
Yes.
Just to be clear, is that means that you only concentrated on migration to urban area and not taking into account rural to rural migration? If I understand correctly, the way you constructed the road.
Yes. So like most of I should show this. So we collected a bit more precise data in 2021 and 2022 on the destinations. And here you can see that most of these flows go to urban areas, but it's not all of them, but it's about 70%. But so I take the city as a proxy of the destination. But so it's like the road here from for example, from this point to Kidal, I take the city of Kidal as the destination. Maybe these people would go somewhere else in the region of Kidal, but at least some of the way will be in common. So it's like there's measurement error in what actual conflict intensity people face in reaching their destination. But I think that's like the best proxy I can use. But if you have other ideas, I'm happy to discuss this now after. Thank you. Okay, so constructing this bilateral data between each of the rural localities surveyed and this set of potential internal mostly destinations, I estimate a gravity model of migration. So it's derived from this like optimal location decision random utility model. So in the main specification, I estimate the ratio of migrants to each specific destination to the stayers as a function of different bilateral origin-specific and destination-specific variables. So first, I will estimate the standard gravity model, where you have migration costs that would be a function of distance between origin and destination, the share of people at the destination that speak the main language at origin, wages at origin, wages at destination. That's very standard in the literature. And then to this standard model, I will add conflict both as a migration cost, so bilateral road conflicts, but also as determinants of attractiveness of both origin and destination. And so here, this is in the same color because depending on the fixed effect, so most of the specification will all include origin fixed effect, destination fixed effect, and time fixed effect. But then in some specification, I will also include origin by year fixed effect and destination by year fixed effect. And this variable that vary over time and destination cannot be estimated. And I also want to stress that when I include the origin by year fixed effects, it includes all time varying variables at the origin level, but that includes what we call the multilateral resistance term also. And so, for example, if like the level of migration in a given locality decreases as a result of increase in average road insecurity, this will be controlled for. So when we control for origin by year fixed effects, we only see substitution between different destinations and not reduction in overall migration. There was a hand raised.
Yeah, you sort of answered just, but do you have a sense whether conflict on route A diverts to route B? Anecdotally, even where that happens. So is other fixed migration routes, or is there some flexibility and people can deviate?
So I don't know exactly I guess it would depend from region. In the north, for example, the road network is not very dense. Then the road infrastructure is also lots of just like a pass trail. It's not like all concrete. So I guess people can change routes, can avoid potential conflicts. But so the way I conceptualize this is that it's both the effect of it includes the effect of having to go an extra mile, like extra distance, to avoid potential conflict on the shortest routes. But it's true that to understand exactly the mechanism, it would be good to disentangle this possibility of alternative routes. Maybe there could be an heterogeneity analysis also.
So not just to alternative routes to the same destination, but also just going to different destinations.
Okay. Yes. Okay, so the change in destination is exactly what I am estimating actually when I have the origin by year fixed effects.
I was also thinking of suggesting actually doing the heterogeneity that you just said, like how different is the first best road and the second best road in a sense. So probably your average estimates, like your estimate will probably be higher for places where there is like only one road or something like that, which are more isolated or something like that. So just
so it could be a ratio shortest distance of first route to distance of second best. Yeah, that could be an option. The thing is that they are not. I will see. But for many regions, there's not so many different road options, so OpenStreetMap doesn't come up with many alternatives. But that could be taken into account. Okay, so that's the main model that I will estimate, and I have to move forward. So just in the first column is the standard gravity model. So you see that the elasticity of distance is a bit smaller than the elasticity generally found in the literature, but generally the literature is focusing on international migration flows. Here I'm focusing on internal migration flows, and I know that in the trade literature, the elasticity of trade to internal distance is also lower generally than international. So I think this is a reasonable estimate. The effect of common language is not significant. It's positive, but not significant in any of the specification. And there's a high elasticity with respect to wages at destination. So then the effect of road fatalities is the main coefficient of interest. And it's rather stable through specifications. So this is, it's about 0.30, 29 when not controlling for any other variables than the conflict at origin and destination. Then controlling for distance, wage at origin and destination, it decreased to 0.20 and is rather stable when controlling for the origin by year and destination by year fixed effects. So that's the main coefficients. These are the main coefficients of interest in this table. Then I also estimate the elasticity, the same model with remittances. Yes, there is a question on the first
Yeah, Marion, I was wondering, do you know about the R squared? Because I think in like international migration, these gravity equations have like R squared of 0.9 often, and you explain much less variation, it seems.
Yes, it's true.
By the way, okay,
Um,
just a curiosity, but no problem if you,
sorry, I don't have a
no
good
problem.
answer for that. I don't know if it's the because yeah, they tend to include the same variables. Yeah, sorry, I don't have a good answer. And so I estimate also the elasticity of remittances to fatalities, so in particular road fatalities. Knowing that there's several dimensions that would be affected by conflict. So it's first the decision to migrate, but then the decision to remit conditional on already being at destination could also be affected by conflict. So it's not as straightforward derived from a model of optimal location decision. But still, we see a negative elasticity also of a probability of receiving transfers and the amount received with road fatalities.
Sorry, just to clarify, could you expect the opposite sign here in principle? Because like if you do not travel, maybe you send money instead. Like if there is a connection and you cannot travel, there might be like a substitution in a sense. I'm just curious how intuitive this coefficient is. I see it's very significant and stable, but just to understand. Because how do they send money? Is it like a wire transfer or is it what? It's not subject to conflict, probably risk, right? Or is it subject to this?
Yeah, so I don't have good data for Mali actually to know what share of remittances is transmitted by is wired or is transmitted by
Of course, I don't so,
actually traveling.
Yeah. Okay.
So that would be most directly affected. But yeah, the a priori effect is ambiguous. It's true. Yes, Elsa.
Yeah, also the sign for the distance maybe means that the normal way to send remittances is through roads, and thus if you are really far away, it's more difficult to send something. Because I'm quite surprised about this negative coefficient for distance. I would not expect that.
Because you have the effect on like it's both the effect of probability of migrating to a place and then conditional on migrating, sending remittances.
Oh, so okay.
So yeah, it's an aggregate of the two. But so yeah, that is to show that there will be like some some cost for the households for this reduced migration. Yes, there is an additional comment.
Yes, I think it'd be nice to see whether that is, and I guess from the household data, you may be able to see how much of that is driven by the low extensive margin of, or just the low extent of migration, and how much is a change in who migrates, just the selection of who are the ones responding to those conflict shocks. Is that
okay? Yes. So yeah, definitely extensive intensive margin I could do with this. The characteristics of migrants, I'm only going to be able to do this with the other kind of of migration data. So on this one, I don't know the characteristics of migrants. It's just the stock of migrants by destination. But with the migration flows, I observe the member departing, so I know all of their characteristics, and this could be a good basis for more detailed analysis on heterogeneous response.
Sorry, Marion, just last interruption, sorry. For panelists and participants, maybe if you have clarification questions, of course, you can ask them, but otherwise, maybe hold them for the open discussion because we also have a discussion after. And Mario, you have about 10 to 15 minutes left.
10 to 15. Okay, I thought only 10. Okay, I will be faster. Okay, and so we can wonder in the case of shocks whether this insecurity will still be a constraint. And I see that actually for households that are affected by droughts, the effect of road fatalities is even stronger. And this is also conditional on this origin by year fixed effects. So meaning that if households still decide to send migrants in case of shocks, the choice of destination of these migrants will be more constrained by road fatalities if these households were affected by droughts. So this suggests that there is also a story of increased monetary cost of migration and liquidity constraints linked to this insecurity on migration routes. So just in terms of mechanism, so I'm not really able to disentangle for now. If you have ideas, I'd be happy to hear more in the discussion, whether this is linked to perceived insecurity and just avoidance of insecurity, or this migration cost increased due to road fatalities. But at least it's consistent with the story also, where households just decide to migrate less to a given destination because they know that this road is insecure. So this is it's just correlation between perception of insecurity and fatalities from conflict events that occur at increasing distance from a given locality. And so we see that the effect of this conflict on perception of insecurity is decaying with distance, but is still detectable for conflicts that are as far as 50 kilometers away from the given locality. So that is not to say the only channel is informational, but it's a possible channel. And so now in the little time left, I will move to the aggregate effects of road insecurity. And so for this, I construct an index of average road insecurity. And so it's simply the road insecurity for each, for a given origin for each of its potential destination. I'm considering only internal destination in this one, weighted by the predicted migration flows to each of these destinations, not considering conflicts. And so that is the result of this first gravity traditional gravity equation estimated in the first table. And so then I will estimate the effects of this average road insecurity on different outcomes, so migration outcomes and welfare outcomes. And so just to recap on the calendar of the survey. So so most departures occur in this post-harvest period. So once I look at this aggregate effect of insecurity, I can look at this post-harvest departures, and then I will be considering conflict events that occur just before the post-harvest departures. And so this also allows me, since I have the exact dates of conflict events and the exact dates of the quarter of departure in migration, more precisely, I can avoid any reverse causality that could be a concern in the first estimation, because I can look at conflict that I know for sure happened before the departure in migration. And when I look at welfare implication, I will consider lean season consumption. That is like the lowest amount of consumption just before the harvest. So that's when income from migration or the ability to send household members away from the household would be most crucial for consumption. So first, looking at the aggregate effects on the same variables as in the gravity model, we see a reduction of the ratio of migrants to stayer associated with this average road fatalities, but no average reduction in remittances received. So that means that probably there is substitution mechanism that happened for remittances. It's compensated probably by remittances from other destinations. And there is no significant heterogeneity with respect to droughts. But looking at this migration flows, so it's like departures in the post-harvest season, we see a reduction linked with road insecurity that is significant for all types of departure. And this effect is stronger for localities that are affected by droughts. So these results are a bit different, but it's not necessarily inconsistent because these seasonal departures can capture other types of migration that the migration stock. And so here I think is where also I should do more work, and it would be interesting to see heterogeneous effect by type of migrants, because this could include departures such as marriage or child fostering that are also like ways of coping with shocks. And then I consider the welfare implications of this average road insecurity, looking at consumption expenditure data. This consumption expenditure is measured in local currency, and I don't have local prices data for this period, but I have it for later periods. But so for now, I'm a bit relying just on the comparison between consumption expenditures of food purchased and on self-consumption to kind of try to disentangle what are the effect on prices to what are the effect on quantity. But that's very like an approximate way, but I think it's an important implication, and it's important to look at it, but I have to do more work on this prices effects. But so on average, road insecurity only affects consumption expenditure when looking at all consumption items together. And then when localities are affected by droughts, road fatalities, average insecurity, affects only consumption expenditures of significatively for consumption expenditures that are both on the market and not for self-consumption. But so you can see that there is this price effect. For example, drought is associated with increased consumption expenditure of food that is purchased on the market.
Marion, you have about like 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes left.
Okay, perfect. So just to recap, I estimate first the elasticity of internal migration to road conflict fatalities. And it's an elasticity that is about like half the size of elasticity to distance. There is also a smaller effect on remittances received. Although for remittances received, I cannot detect any aggregate effects. There is evidence for internal migration of both substitution between destinations and reduction of migration. These results are robust to estimation with instrumenting for conflict, so using spatial and temporal lags of conflicts that I'm not going to show now then, of extending the buffer around roads of 2 to 5 kilometers, also using different types of less precise geocoded events. And I find also that the aggregate effects can be found on precisely dated migration flows, which reduces the concern of reverse causality. Then these results are both consistent with the effect of insecurity on liquidity constraints and perceived insecurity. And there is suggestive evidence that households are less able to smooth consumption and cope with droughts when they have less migration opportunities due to road conflicts. So there is a reduction in remittances received from specific destination, and there is an aggregate reduction in nominal consumption. But to be able to disentangle the effect of trade versus migration, I'm planning to use price data in later period to estimate trade cost elasticity and see which parts of the welfare effects can be attributed to trade versus migration. That's the plan for the future. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to discuss now.
Thank you, Marion. Thanks for a very nice presentation. Very good timing as well. So now we will jump to the discussion by Marion. So Marion, if you want to unshare your screen.
Yeah.
And
Thank you again. Let me check.
Am I still sharing?
yeah, you're still sharing.
It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Mm-hmm.
You should be co-host now.
Perfect. I think it works now. Can you see the slides?
Yeah, great.
Just okay. Okay, so thanks everyone. Thanks Marion for such a nice presentation and paper, because I have to say that I not just enjoyed reading it, but I also learned a lot about the topic. So I'll try to be brief because I mean the discussion was already interesting, so I don't want to distract you with just my comments. So well, what's the key? Sorry, let me just because I cannot see the slides well. Yeah. Okay, so a bit about this paper. So this paper tries to understand how conflict-induced insecurity in main migration routes affects mobility, and particularly what is the impact on households' ability to rely on migration as a risk-coping mechanism. The context is the one of armed conflicts in the Sahel region. Very brief, what are the key contributions of the paper? To begin with, I think that Marion does a very nice contribution in finding a new channel through which indirect exposure to conflict can affect households' welfare through let's say, through reduced economic migration opportunities. I think that in terms of the migration literature and so, most of the literature has focused, we've seen a lot of papers on conflict induced displacements, whereas she looks at as an outcome in terms of how these types of conflicts are actually disrupting usual patterns of regular migration. I think that's very, very interesting, and I haven't seen many papers on that. So I think that's very novel. And I think that it's also relevant in the sense that it's been well documented that temporary migration is important, especially in developing countries. And also adds, of course, to the literature on barriers to mobility by doing like a very, very deep investigation of a cause that has been widely overseen, but nevertheless very, very important. And what is key for this is the granular geolocated data on conflict events that she has. So as I said before, I think that the paper is very nice. I haven't seen many papers that look at what's going on in the route. And I think it's relevant for many different regions. I think that it's also relevant for what is happening right now in terms of migration to the United States, for instance. So I think that you can put that in a very wide context. It's relevant not just for the region, and I think that's something that I really liked, that I liked a lot about the paper. I think that it shows how good you are at handling these very granular geographical data. It's impressive, and I think that's evident for these high quality illustrations that you showed us in the presentation that you also have in the paper. And as I said before, you do make an important contribution to the bilateral migration gravity framework. So I mean, I think that the paper is very nice. Let me go to other more general comments. So as I said before, I think that the granularity of the data is very nice, but maybe it would be useful in the paper, because some of these things I think that you already added to the presentation, but you give us a very detailed zoom in, so we know that you can like measure conflict with very high accuracy. But it would be useful to provide some context of what are we looking at too. So to zoom out a bit, which you already did in some graphs of the presentation, but for people to have an idea of what is the Sahel region, because I mean, what are these routes? What are the countries we are talking about? Because the maps were very, very detailed. So for somebody that it's not very familiar with the context, it might be useful to have like the general picture, and pretty much as you did in the presentation right now. Then other comments in terms of the data that you use for departure information. So you mentioned that you have household survey data for post-harvest departure, and you also have a special module of immigration that I understand that that's the one that you use. But you mentioned two sources, which I wasn't very sure, in the sense that one source was whether immigrants were just living, not migrants, whether people were just leaving the house. And another one was the module. And I don't understand if you use the module for the gravity model and the one of the departures for the other model, or maybe I didn't understand it correctly, but if you just use departures, I was just wondering, how do you account for other reasons? So marriages, in terms of maybe you can look at age, gender, and try to disentangle or try to get a proxy of what is really migration. If you don't use this, I wouldn't mention it at all in the paper, but I was a bit confused between which is the actual data that you are using. Then in terms of, I think that you also use data from the census based on return migration. I understand that that's for the second part, and that's also how you measure I mean, where are people migrating? Because I think that they report where were they before or something like that. So I was just wondering if you think that there might be a risk of selection there. I don't know if people that are returning are people that come from more violent places, or maybe some that do not return, they don't do it because they are not able to come back via the same route. But I don't know, I was thinking that maybe you can compare the distribution that you have in terms of origins, even at the aggregate level, with another source and say, okay, we don't have much problem with this data, maybe there is no selection. Well, this is a very minor comment in terms of data on conflicts. I think that you use only events coded with the highest geographical precision, and I think that makes total sense. But if you also have other aggregate events, maybe you can use that for robustness or something if you have the data. Okay, then in terms of the IV approach, I think that, well, I didn't see a lot of details in the paper about it, but I understand that you try to use lagged values of temporal and spatial conflict. So I was just thinking that it would be useful, and again, like probably you are still developing this part of the paper, but if you could elaborate a bit further on what's the exogeneity assumption there, because we know that there can be, of course, like a lagged impact potentially. In fact, like you already consider a lagged effect in your gravity model. So how lagged, I don't know, like how large are these lags that you use for the IV, and what's exactly the exogeneity assumptions that you are making about it? Is it a pardon or is it a shift share? I don't know. So maybe more details about it. Also because remittances might have a lagged effect. So I think that you already, received some of these comments before in the presentation, in the sense of how are people sending the remittances? Is it via wire transfers, or do they wait until they have to come back? And in that sense, the effect might be even, longer than in the immediate after, 6-month period or 3-month period that you look at, if I understood correctly. Then I was just thinking that maybe you can provide, if it makes sense or not, some placebo tests. So just wondering how frequent are these events, and maybe not for all of them, but for some regions or for some routes, maybe you can check, if, just use the past migration I don't know, flows to a specific region and see whether that correlates with future events. And if it doesn't, then you might have an extra check. Well, then this question you already got in your presentation already, whether you can estimate explicitly flows to alternative destinations are increasing. Somehow you are already accounting for that in the gravity model, I agree. But well, that's also a doubt that I had. And then on the last points of your conclusion, actually, that you estimate the welfare effects in terms of consumption, but of course, the other mechanism that is there is if there's a potential effect on trade. So if our insecurity is affecting trade, if that's increasing prices, and maybe that's why people are also reducing their consumption. So, but you already mentioned that, so I think that's something, yeah, that people might wonder about, and it's great that you already have it in mind. And then these are, well, other minor comments for the draft that I'll send you by email anyways. I think that it would be useful to have a magnitude of the effects in the, like, so to put, you give it elasticities, but maybe you could put it in context a bit. So like how, by how much is actually immigration reducing because of these conflicts. And then in terms of potential extensions, this is actually also related to something that you said in the conclusions. I think that it would be interesting to see if there are any gender implications of these types of conflicts. So I don't know if women are more prone to stay, or in general, who are these migrants? Is it equally men or women that are immigrating? Or is there any sort of gender structure in terms of who's working agriculture and who is more exposed to these events? So I think that would be very, very interesting to see. And yeah, I finish here. Yeah, thanks a lot for your presentation and for your super nice paper.
Cool, thank you, Mariale. So we can now open the floor for to any participant. So if you have a question, you can just raise your hand, and I will give you the opportunity. Okay, so I already see. So wait, so Andrea, you should be able to unmute now.
Hi, yeah, great presentation, Marion. Very nice topic. I was wondering actually if it's actually connected to the last point from Maria. If you could, I apologize if you actually have touched that topic already. If you have some changes in the selection of migrants, because now the costs are higher, there's overall a decrease in migration, but maybe also the profile of migrants change, those who stay and those who go, in terms of gender, as Maria said, but in terms of income, in terms of education, anything on that? Yeah, great, thanks.
Yeah. Can I answer no to some questions, or we just...
Yeah, sure, okay, can answer this one, and then there will be Alex and Simon.
Okay, so yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks, Andrea, for the question. Thanks a lot, Maria, for all the comments. That's super helpful. I'm happy to have your slides after, if you can share. So I'm not going to answer to all the questions now, I guess, but just because this comes also like together with Andrea's question. So there was this question of like the data on this seasonal migration departures and how it's used in the model. So this data is a bit like the quarter departure. I don't know exactly, I don't know the destinations, and it's a bit hard to say whether this is real migration or just people leaving the households. But I can show, like, using posterior data, that like 80% of this departure correspond to people actually leaving at least their commune of origin, and then for different reasons. And I think this data is kind of important and a good complement to the migration stock analysis that is the one used in the gravity model, exactly because it would allow me also, like, I know the characteristics of the migrants, and I think looking at this gender dimension, as you last mentioned, would be very important. And yeah, as Andrea was just saying also, yeah, changing the composition of in the characteristics of migrants due to conflicts. I think that would be very interesting. Yeah, thank you for these suggestions.
All right, so Alex, you can go now.
All right, yeah, thanks a lot. That's super interesting. Just two brief considerations. So first, maybe a bit more general one is that you motivate this paper in terms of consumption smoothing and basically kind of risk sharing across communities, if I understand correctly. And migration helps to address these things. So I just think that in principle, you can first maybe document that migration flows, let's say, are higher between communities that are somehow more dissimilar to each other, or where shocks tend to be negatively correlated. There is this paper, for example, by Ruben Durante and Johannes Bagel in the EJ, showing how climatic volatility affects this kind of cooperations across regions, if I recall correctly. And maybe you can show something like that just to support your motivation. So how much of this migration is actually this kind of consumption smoothing? So people probably move, I don't know, from localities with more droughts in one period to localities with maybe more droughts later on, or something like that. Or maybe one location specializes in X and the other is specializing in Y, and so on. And then just a brief thing is that there was this paper by McGuirk and Nunn on climate migration and transhuman pastoralism. I think it's quite close in a sense to what you're doing here. Just take a look, maybe if that's relevant. I'm not so sure. So thanks.
Okay, so maybe Simon, you can also ask your question, and then Marion can answer like one or two questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. So I think the strength of the paper really is the focus on the dyadic part and controlling for both origin time and destination time effects. So really to get rid of the potential effect of conflicts on either of the locations. And so I think in the consumption part, it'd be nice to go a bit in this direction as well, because right now, as I understand, the consumption information is origin information ultimately. So there's none of this destination link. But when it comes to prices, you could, I guess, right? If you have a sense of where goods maybe originate from, so right, do prices increase for goods that come on these routes, so that you still would have variation across different destinations as well. And so just to take out any of the origin and the destination effects separately as far as possible, I think that strengthens the paper. But nice.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it would be nice to have this detailed price data. I have it like per consumption items, and maybe there is like one or two goods for which I could like know where they are mostly like produced in, or yeah, I have to think of an equivalent like this. It would be nice to have also the gravity model for trade. I don't have like of course, internal trade data. But it's true that the aggregate estimation on consumption is a bit less convincing because we don't have these fixed effects. But still, maybe I could also exclude events that happen very close to the locality and only keep events that only affect indirectly, like we could consider because they occur very far, I don't know, maybe more than 50 kilometers away. And maybe that would make it more convincing. I don't know. But still, this like trade cost elasticity, it seems kind of essential to draw welfare implications. And then thanks, Alexander, also for the suggestions. So it's true that I'm showing throughout the presentation that there is this effect on remittances and on migration of this of the droughts, but maybe that should come earlier in the motivation already, like kind of preliminary analysis on that, and other motivating estimation. And yeah, thanks for the McGuirk and Nunn paper. Yeah, it's also the effect of the effect of drought on conflict through migration. It's a bit of a different mechanism, but yeah, and it's also like it explains why you mostly see like the effect of conflict is due to neighboring cells droughts and not on cells droughts, that I was using also like to kind of discard omitted variable bias and say, okay, it's not that directly conflict is induced by drought, and so is migration. But yeah, that's cool, baby.
Great, thanks. So last question for today. I think Andres, you should be able to ask a question.
Yeah, thank you, Etienne. A very nice presentation, Marion. I really enjoyed it. It's my first time in the seminar, so it was a great start. Just a very quick question related on the last point you were discussing on occurrences of conflict. I was wondering if there's like a pattern, maybe it's just completely random, but maybe conflict occurs in a special week or month or season, let's say spring, so to say, and whether that can correlate with expectations. So you can already foresee that in springtime there will be issues, so households already can anticipate that in a way. Yeah, just for taking that. Thank you.
Yes, there is indeed a high seasonality in conflict intensity. So you see like the months where I'm unmuted, yeah. the months of like of harvest, there is the lowest conflict intensity. But then it kind of well, I'm not gonna share again, but it's just like really the months of harvest that it decreases and it decreases again. And so I think when people when it's the time for departure, it's generally the time when it like peaks again also. So I guess people will factor this in their expectations too.